Okay, so this unit is about AAC intervention for individuals with developmental disabilities. So, approximately 1 in 6 children in the US have a diagnosis of a developmental disability, and this is based on data gathered in 2006 and 2000 to 2008. And these developmental disabilities can really range in severity from mild, such as a speech and language impairment, to severe developmental disabilities, such as diagnoses like cerebral palsy or autism or intellectual disability, deaf, blindness, and more. And what we're going to talk about today is how AAC can be an intervention technique for individuals with such different abilities, with different diagnoses. So, one diagnosis that we see quite frequently within the field of AAC is cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy can really result from a number of different etiologies. It affects motor skills, and so an individual with cerebral palsy can present with some spastic movements or involuntary movements. They could have a hemiplegia or hemiparesis. They could have relatively good use of their hands and arms, or just their legs may be affected. So, really, their physical presentation can vary considerably. And because of this, the AAC tool can really vary. So, just because someone has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, it doesn't point a clinician in the direction of a specific AAC system or tool because the individual's abilities will vary quite considerably. So, given this, an AAC approach, an AAC intervention really calls for a team approach. It really calls for input from an OT and or PT, given the motor difficulties an individual may have. In many cases, it may also call for vision and mobility specialty services to help ensure that the AAC system is in fact the right tool for the individual. And it also really calls for a balanced approach to intervention. So it's not just about an AAC system and the AAC needs for that individual. It's also about their motor development and motor needs. Does their motor change, their motor abilities change depending on the nature and severity of their condition, or as they get older or more fatigued, or are they on a program, a medical program to help support their motor skills. So that also has to be taken into consideration, as it may greatly affect how they access an AAC system. There's also oftentimes speech therapy in addition to AAC consultation to help support breath support, articulation, accounting for fatigue, all those different things, and supporting communication. Oftentimes people are also oral communicators and alongside using AAC. And also we have to take into consideration academic instruction and call for consultation from a general educator as well as a special educator, depending on the nature and the severity of the case. So to kind of bring this to life, we have a case example of a young man about 15 years old with spastic cerebral palsy, participates in an inclusive program, receiving additional support from a physical therapist, speech language pathologist, AAC consultant, and more. He has evolved from a dedicated speech generating device that offers auditory scanning to a more portable solution with Prolo to Go and two-step scanning. He has a very customized overlay to help ensure access to core vocabulary as well as some phrases. He uses a combination of words, phrases, and sentences in addition to a QWERTY keyboard with word prediction. So when someone's using such a complex overlay and also requires the physical adaptations, they are really needing quite a bit of customization at this time. In addition, as we know, technology often breaks, or we need a backup should something happen, or should we be in an environment in which the technology isn't practical. This individual has a low-tech option, which involves screenshots of the specific overlay, and that allows a communication partner, to present the same presentation of auditory scanning options and looking for his way of selecting. So that way, the partner can talk through the options and look for the individual to build a sentence in that way or communicate in a way in which he's better able to express himself. So here's a screenshot of a customized overlay. So it looks a little different to a traditional core-based overlay within the Prolo Quota Go. Things have been moved around according to his communicative needs, wants, and about which he communicates most. So he has some categories up top, and that he'll receive those first within his auditory scanning pattern. And then he also has core vocabulary with pronouns as well as verbs. And all of those look like a folder as they've been specifically designed to offer a pop-up, which means that once selected, it can close to reduce the amount of navigation he has to do. So we have an example here of this in action.
So we are back with Isaiah, and I wanted to show you how he is accessing his iPad for communication. He uses the two switches next to his head. Isaiah, can you show us which switch you use to move the cursor? Which one do you use to move it? The one on your right. And then once you hear what you want, you hit the one on the right there, the one on the left. And so Isaiah is primarily listening to the prompts on your talker, right? And so to help his communication partner, when the talker is talking, if you hear a female voice, like a girl, it's just the scanning. But for Isaiah to talk, it's a guy, right? Makes sense. Yeah.
So that was an example of Isaiah demonstrating the two-step scanning. So he moves and, sorry about that. So he moves with one selection and then he makes a selection with a different head movement. So oscillating between the left and right switches on his headrest. Okay, so intellectual disabilities are really characterized by significant limitations in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. In order to have a diagnosis of an intellectual disability, it must be given before the age of 18. And when it comes to AAC use, AAC has really only been considered for this population since about the 1980s, so it's relatively new within the field. And what we have to pay special attention to as an AAC team are really opportunity barriers. So when are there opportunities for the individual to communicate? How are they able to do so currently? What may have restricted their participation previously? How can AAC help? We also have to pay really close attention to the relationship between communication and behavior. So if we see some maladaptive behaviors, what is the communicative purpose? Why is the individual expressing in that way? For many individuals with intellectual disabilities, behavior has been the most effective mode of communication. And so now we're asking to replace that with use of AAC. So we have to pay really, really close attention to what does that throwing or the trashing or the resistance to participate, what does that mean? And also, what are the positive behaviors telling us? How is an individual communicating when they engage in a certain way? So there's a really strong link between communication and behavior for this population, and we need to be really careful in trying to detail what does each of those behaviors mean, and how can we help introduce AAC to more effectively express that in a more universally and acceptable manner. And also, when we are providing intervention, so oftentimes AAC gets called on because of maladaptive behaviors, bad behaviors, things that we're wanting to change. But it's really important that as we introduce AAC, we have a positive focus. If someone's in a heightened sense of agitation and they're trying to express, no, I don't want, presenting an IAC system at that same time is going to build a negative connotation with the tool. So we have to be really careful in how we introduce and apply AAC tools in these situations. When we think about individuals with intellectual disabilities in general, they represent a really diverse population. So we have to, we can't make assumptions. Everyone's different. And what we must always do is assume competence, and think about what an individual can do, or that they are likely going to surprise us when presented with the right tools. And so we always have to assume competence. We also have to focus on participation and giving an individual a more active role within their environment. So going back to those opportunity barriers. So, how can we leverage the use of AAC and different technologies to support independence as well as just participation, and from meaningful participation comes communication. And so you can kind of see how all of these things are related when we're working with individuals with intellectual disabilities. Okay, so we have a case example here of a 14-year-old young lady with Down syndrome. She's in a substantially separate program which has a really heavy emphasis on reading, writing, and math. She likes to read. She can read a lot. And her AAC system is really well designed to help capitalize on her reading strengths. She has a panoramic vantage light with a 60 sequenced overlay. There's some customized pages that have been included to reduce navigation to support conversational turn taking. So for example, if there's a favorite movie, or we'll see on the next slide an example of this with a fairy tale, but if, for example, she really enjoyed The Lion King or something like that, we have a page designed to embed a combination of core vocabulary that is already present on the device, but is now on that page so that she can combine words and phrases in the context of this really motivating topic to help support that conversational turn taking and language generation without having to focus on navigation and how does she find and where does she find those words. So she's using 1 to 5 words, sometimes telegraphically, so they may not be perfect combinations, but the meaning is certainly there, in combination with a QWERTY keyboard and word prediction. So a lot of literacy strengths being capitalized upon in using the device. For written composition, which is really motivating, she is connecting her device to either an iPad with a camera connection kit or to a computer, and so then she has access to words, phrases, and her familiar communication system to express herself for written output purposes. And this has been really powerful and motivating, and also helps make written output more representative of her inner language. Whereas if she's worrying about just focusing on spelling on a traditional keyboard, we take away that demand and we give her access to words and phrases, and so she's better able to express herself through the combination of supports. So here's an example of one of the adapted pages that has a combination of some core vocabulary as well as some different, their pronouns and their verbs and their adjectives, and whenever possible they've been kept in locations in which she would find that word within the core. So we're capitalizing on the consistency of the mode of planning of her device layout. And then we have some topic-specific vocabulary on the top that's really relevant to the specific fairy tale. And then that way we can stay on this page and she can build sentences about the story and be able to engage in conversational turn-taking more easily. So we're going to see a combination, just this student in action. And just hit it. Yeah. Jacqueline, I love it. What? Oh my goodness.
Apple.
Oh my.
Juice.
Wow! And how do we end our sentence? You're going to have to spin your activity row. Yes, no words. Okay.
We drink apple juice.
Jacqueline Boucher. Oh my. That was record time. Record time. So in that example, we saw a combination of tools being used, but most importantly, I'm not sure if you're able to notice, but the device was connected to her laptop computer. And so the sentence she was building was simultaneously being put into a Word document that she could then print and hand in, which is so important to have that sense of completion. We used a combination of behavioral supports to ensure her success and gradually faded those scaffolded supports to gain more and more independence. But the point was to build a sentence, build it relatively quickly, and feel really good about it. Okay, so autism spectrum disorders. Recent estimates suggest that approximately 1 in 68 individuals in the United States has an autism spectrum disorder. Approximately 40, and these numbers vary slightly, but it's estimated that 40% of these individuals don't develop speech in universally understood manners, and that potentially 25 to 30% lose speech by about 18 months. There have been some changes with respect to the DSM and how they categorize autism, and Asperger's is now rolled into the diagnosis, and so there's certainly some more resources that you can explore to learn more about the current understanding of autism spectrum disorders. But as it relates to the use of AAC, the general mentality when it comes to providing intervention for individuals with autism is to start early and to provide a level of intensity to ensure and to help their progress, especially the earlier and the more intense it can be, the better. And so really AAC has a huge role with individuals with autism, and we know more and more in the literature that providing access to AAC does not stunt speech development. In fact, it can oftentimes enhance it. And what we found is that speech output, when given to an individual with autism, helps them realize that there's attention getting. They're using a mode of communication that is universally understood. So it's a social bridge with interacting with others. And there's also a flexibility with the speech generating device that can really be customized for that individual and their unique interests, or to help them with specific goals, social and developmental contexts. We can really adjust the AAC system to best meet the needs of an individual with an autism spectrum disorder. So we have an AAC case example of a 5-year-old young boy with autism spectrum disorder, put in the severe category requiring substantial support. He's in a substantially separate autism program which embeds principles of ABA. And there's an approach, the LAMP approach, language acquisition through motor planning, which was incorporated into his AAC assessment. And he really responded well to the automaticity of icon location. So when there was something that was really motivating, he would automatically orient his finger to that icon representing that, because he kind of trusted in the location and wasn't as much paying attention to what the icon looked like, or where we took away any of the visual scanning demands because we just placed powerful icons in consistent locations. So one of the devices, there are a number of them that implement this kind of approach, but Pranky devices and their Unity language software do. Also their LAMP Words for Life app. So we trialed many different systems and came up with the Accent 800 with a 60-hit one-hit overlay as being the most effective for the individual. And we really modified that overlay. So kept everything in the same location, but hid a number of buttons to help ensure his success. And that way, as he gained more and more success, we could reveal more and more icons and build up the complexity of the system without changing the location of the icons. So icons that he'd learned to trust their location remained in that location, to help ensure that automaticity. So he was using an intervention focused on supporting his advancement from using 1 words up to 2 and 3 word combinations to make requests. his area of interest were specifically in food and drinking, having his basic needs met, which is a really, really important start, and also really effective way for him to communicate. And as previously mentioned, we implement the LAMP approach. So you can see in the picture on the right, the modified overlay. So all the gray is suggestive of icons that have been hidden. So as we slowly reveal more and more icons, they are the ones that he is exposed to and familiar with are staying in that location. We worked really hard on implementing his AAC use and goals into his ABA program and identified some target phrases for him to work on and words, and that we would then track data. When it comes to data tracking and intervention with respect to AAC, as much the individual's expressive output is as important as the communication partner's receptive input. So we place a heavy emphasis on tracking on the modeled phrases. So what was the communication partner showing to him to give him a clear model of how to use these different phrases in specific contexts? So we tracked what the communication partner did and whether or not the individual made that phrase unprompted or prompted. We have an example here of supporting his advancement to 2-word combinations. Let's do it. You ready? Uh-oh. We're gonna wait till you're ready.
Ready?
Eat. Eat. Potato.
Woo! You did it. You did it. That's awesome. Not impressive. Okay, so very specific goal, moving him from 1 to 2-word combinations, but extremely powerful getting him to that point. And he's now doing 3-word combinations and has gained much more independence. But you could have probably noticed a combination of prompting techniques, a little bit of hand under hand initially to try and get him started, but waiting as soon as there was any resistance and pushback. That's the whole point of hand under hand. And then keeping the icons present so that he's having to work through the relatively visually distracting overlay, and then helping him build that automaticity. So eat plus the word, and multiple trials to help with that. Okay, so individuals who are either deaf and or blind, obviously these impairments significantly affect an individual's way of acquiring information via visual and or auditory channels. And there can be any number of reasons why someone may present with as deaf or hard of hearing or blind and low vision. And obviously, as with cerebral palsy and all of these different etiologies or diagnoses, the population varies considerably. So there are a wide range of AAC options that need to be considered. And oftentimes, because a sensory channel is affected, we need really systematic instruction to help an individual gain, to learn a system and to gain independence using that tool. So as a communication partner or the interventionist, we need to be able to facilitate access to the environment. So how is this tool going to help an individual not only express themselves, but gain access to their environment? And AAC tools can really help with that. And we also have to support the development of receptive and expressive skills and develop a relationship. The role of the communication partner is so powerful in helping the individual not only learn a tool, but also understanding and learning their environment. From the simplest perspective, if someone is deaf, or we're going to give them visual information that there's going to be a change in something, or they're going to learn that, or someone's hard of hearing, if someone has low vision, really talking them through, this person's entered your environment, or now we're going to work on this, we're putting this tool in front of you. So a really, really powerful and important relationship is developed with the individual and their communication partner. So we have a case example to bring this to light, a 2.5-year-old boy with a CVI and really complex communication needs. a home-based early intervention program, really medically supported at all times. So we wanted to develop a modified eye gaze system that capitalized on his eye gaze strengths, but at the same time took into account his needs, his visual needs, based on the nature and severity of his CVI. We knew that we needed to embed real objects, but understood the importance of exposing him and building an icon and symbol repertoire. So in addition, we had to incorporate visual attention techniques. So how do we draw the individual's attention and help them learn about shifting gaze? So again, this is this really systematic instruction on how to learn a tool. So in this particular example, we are using two contrasting, basically stop and go, with the go being more of a preferred object or item and stop indicating to stop that. So we have an example of this in action. We can see the setup here. So the individual is positioned really specifically, accounting for his head positioning, and this was based on really close collaboration with his physical therapist and vision team. And so really, as well as his speech language pathologist and medical professionals. So this is really based on his positioning and how his head is at rest and what it goes into how we need to position him to be able to help him move his head to look to the either stop or the preferred object. And so we also then have to take into consideration the high contrast background. How do we include real objects? So there's a little shelf on which the object can sit, and the icon is Velcro to this black background board. And then we'll see that we incorporate a dowel with just a tiny bit of tinfoil to help him draw his attention. So we weren't allowed to use laser lights or anything like that, given seizure precautions. So we tried to have something that could provide movement and visual contrast to help him shift his gaze. So here we can see it in action.
Llama, llama, very good, Jackson. Nice job. Let's see. Oh, some more. Snuggle in, turn out the light. Llama, llama, nighty night. Our llama, llama book is all done. Okay. We're gonna stop our llama, llama book. Good job. Yes, we're going to stop it. That's really good looking, Jackson. Nice job. Wow.
Okay, so you can see the really systematic instruction and helping him understand. This is all errorless, not working on him telling us stop or requesting more, but having him participate in using, communicating in that way. And then you can also just see the time needed to allow for his response. And this is not unique to this individual. AAC instruction and use really takes a lot of time. So we have to account for that in our intervention. Okay, so one of the last ones we'll talk within this unit is childhood apraxia of speech. And so this is a congenital neurological speech sound disorder that really affects the precision and consistency of speech movements. Oftentimes an individual knows or has an idea of what they want to say, but can't quite coordinate the movements necessary to do so. So in these cases, AAC is often a secondary strategy behind speech intervention. So the individual is verbal, but oftentimes is hard to understand. And so AAC can really be a powerful tool to help the individual express themselves more effectively and avoid frustration. It's unbelievably frustrating, especially as individuals, have strong communicative intent and they are not able to get their point across. So again, this is often, a secondary strategy to speech language intervention. What I love about incorporating AAC use into an intervention plan and program is that it really helps. While there's a focus on speech, we can simultaneously really address language through the use of AAC and provide an individual access to a whole slew of vocabulary and language, words and phrases that may be really hard for them to articulate. So it's part of a really effective program in addressing both speech and language by incorporating AAC. So it really can vary depending on the nature and severity of the individual's apraxia. So it's kind of a multi-tiered approach when thinking about it. So we can have traditional AAC in the sense that an individual is using an AAC system to express themselves. So they have really significant, severe apraxia, and they're really hard to understand. So they're most often using an AAC system to be better understood and to express themselves with some verbal approximations alongside. But there could also be AAC for supplementation. So they may say one or two words verbally, but that's within their repertoire, and use an AAC system to finish a phrase or sentence, or in that kind of combination. So really a combination of the two, both verbal and AAC use. And you may see one or two words done verbally and one or two words done with an AAC system. And this will vary depending on the individual's repertoire and goals and what they can or can't do at the time. And then you can also have AAC for communication breakdown. So it's really a backup tool if the individual wasn't understood. So they may have tried to say stegosaurus, had a hard time articulating that, and then gone in and found the word on an AAC system to help clarify their message. AAC can be really powerful for both literacy and academics for these individuals. They obviously have a lot of speech and language strengths and are verbal communicators in many cases. So to help them manipulate sounds that they can't really that they can't say themselves, or to play around with words that are being addressed in a academic unit that again they can't say, is critical and really effective. So an AAC system can really be a powerful tool to help with literacy and academics. And then there are also opportunities to use AAC for practice. We often say that an AAC system is a walking, talking speech therapist. So an individual is getting a good model of how to say and articulate different words. And often that voice output allows an opportunity, and individuals with apraxia oftentimes repeat that and can clarify their speech in those ways. So you can see how it really changes depending on the nature and severity of the individual's apraxia, but how versatile an AAC tool can be with this population and other populations, but very much with this population that has such verbal strengths, but different difficulties with articulation and articulatory coordination. So we have a case example of this. We have a 5-year-old boy with a diagnosis of apraxia of speech. He's in a partially included program with some instruction offered by a discrete trial format to support his learning technique, as well as inclusive opportunities with his peers, which he finds really motivating. So he has Proloquo to go with a pretty standard core vocabulary. However, some pages have been customized to reduce navigational demands. So just like we saw earlier, a topic-specific page included the same core vocabulary on each of the pages, so that there's a consistency to the layout of the vocabulary, but it also allows an individual, especially someone who's so verbal and isn't going to necessarily wait or worry about navigating to find all these different words. It gives him access to all this core vocabulary on these topic-specific pages so that he can build sentences, which is really his area of verbal weakness, and the AAC system is accounting for that while reducing any navigation demands. Something that has evolved as a really powerful tool is that the grammar features within Proloquo to Go are turned on. So different parts of speech are different colors, and that helps, in trying to build length of utterance and teach him different linguistic structures to say, oh, you're going to go and get a blue word, a describing word, or make sure you get an orange pronoun. So it helps us teach that. Another really nice piece of it is that you can, if you hold, or depending on the setup of the system, you can get access to different grammatical conjugations. So he can see a verb changing to past tense, or he can see adding a plural s. It really brings to life language subtleties that he's unable to articulate given the nature of his apraxia, but is able to develop at the same time. And hopefully, as his speech mechanism and his speech in general improves, he's more familiar with how to conjugate verbs or to refine his language because he's had practice using AAC. So this is really a total communication approach. And thinking about that multi-tiered discussion on the previous slide, he's kind of using it in all those different ways. It's not his sole mode of communication, but he's using it in combination with his own verbal speech and words. He's using it to repair communication breakdowns. So he's often talking about dinosaurs and all specific kinds of dinosaurs that we don't know. And so he's able to quickly locate it on his AAC system and help express himself. It's very much embedded in his academics for literacy and for a different specific vocabulary for a topic or a unit to support his participation in the classroom. And, again, just really using it in all these different ways. One tool can be really versatile. So we can see it in action here. So this is an example of one of the customized pages that each of those categories that we see in white, so appliances, animals, art, supplies, body parts, have the same, what I like to call core vocabulary L. So the I, the you, the it, the he, the she, that's present on all of those pages. And then the white folders are replaced with that specific vocabulary, so specific appliances, specific animals, and more. So here we see some in action.
I, you. I hurt.
No.
Try again.
I
House.
Good voice. That's right. I love your voice. That's that one right there.
have. Noses.
You don't have noses. You have one nose.
I want.
No. Things have.
Have. Feet. I have feet.
Perfect.
Okay, so you could see how the overlay had the same L, but the nouns, the topic-specific nouns for the body parts were all there in that bottom location. And we were able to work on building a sentence without having to keep on jumping back to get that I. So he could really just focus on what he was trying to do in that situation, and was able to pluralize words, which is really hard for him to do just given the nature of his apraxia. Okay, so that was a brief introduction to different developmental disabilities within the field of AAC, or more specifically, how AAC can help individuals with different abilities with those varying diagnoses. Thanks.